Hello and welcome. This is Wilrens for Create a Learning Site, the place to go deeper in your understanding of the Bible. John's Gospel, here a scene unique to this book, Jesus washing the feet of his disciples, is not a book I have taught often. Without giving it much thought, I have usually assumed that the John of its title must be the Apostle John, the son of Zebedee, one of the inner circle of Jesus' 12 disciples. After all, this is what the church fathers, the early leaders and theologians of the church, believed. At least most of them. Or so I thought. Richard Bauckham is giving me reasons to reconsider who really is the author of the fourth Gospel. When it comes to issues like the authorship of a book, we distinguish between internal and external evidence. Internal evidence is what we find in the book itself. External evidence is all the information we may derive from other sources. These other sources are often different books of the Bible or extra biblical documents. For the New Testament, especially the writings of the Church Fathers. For the Gospel of John, one bit of external evidence is readily accessible. Its title. The Gospel titles are not part of the original documents, so this is not internal but external evidence, but they are very old, probably almost as old as the Gospels themselves. This means that the link between the fourth Gospel and John is ancient. Besides, no other name was ever linked with this Gospel. However, this does not answer the question fully. John was a common name. Which John are we talking about? This is where it starts getting interesting. The oldest external evidence that we have comes from Papias. Papias lived in the Roman province of Asia and eventually became bishop of Hierapolis, which is in the general region of Ephesus. According to a later church father, Irenaeus, who died around the year 202, Papias had been a hearer of John. And yes, here too, the question is, which John? Papias had first and second-hand information on the apostles and the authorship of the four Gospels. In fact, he himself claimed that he deliberately questioned those who had known Jesus or had heard from the apostles directly to gather reliable information. Quote, "And if by chance anyone who had been in attendance on the elders arrived, I made enquiries about the words of the elders, what Andrew or Peter had said, or Philip, or Thomas, or James, or John, or Matthew, or any other of the Lord's disciples, and whatever Aristion and John the elder, the Lord's disciples, were saying. For I did not think that information from the books would profit me as much as information from a living and surviving voice." This is the famous quotation that establishes a real possibility that there were two Johns, both disciples and eyewitnesses of Jesus. After all, the name John appears twice, once in a list of apostles, and once identified as John the Elder, together with Aristion, a disciple who is not one of the 12 not mentioned in the New Testament. The church historian Eusebius, who lived around 300, certainly understood Papias in this way, and adds that both Johns had ministered in Asia and that each had his tomb in Ephesus. It is important to notice the difference in verb tenses in the passage just quoted. Papias inquired about what the apostles had said and what Aristion and John the Elder were saying. They were still active when Papias inquired. If there were indeed two Johns in Ephesus, who of them wrote the Gospel, John the Apostle or John the Elder? Whoever wrote the Gospels probably also wrote the epistles of John, and it's worth noting that in two of John's letters the author identifies himself simply as the Elder. But this alone can hardly be conclusive. There is another early voice from the same region, Polycartes, bishop of Ephesus, and therefore in a position to know which John they ought. In a dispute about the correct date for the Easter celebration, Polycartes wrote a letter to Rome in which he states, For indeed in Asia great luminaries have fallen asleep, such as shall rise again on the day of the Lord's appearing, when he comes with the glory from heaven to seek out all his saints, to wit, Philip, one of the 12 apostles, who has fallen asleep in Hierapolis, as have also his 2 daughters who grew old in virginity, and his other daughter who lived in the Holy Spirit and rests at Ephesus. And moreover there is John too, he who leaned back on the Lord's breast, who was a priest, wearing the sacerdotal plate, both martyr and teacher. He has fallen asleep at Ephesus. That this John leaned back on the Lord's breast suggests that Polycritus identifies him as the author of the Gospel. The reference to the priestly plate is strange, because it suggests that this John had functioned as high priest at some point, the only one who would ever wear this plate. Now, whatever the truth behind this, and Richard Bauckham goes at great lengths to give an explanation, nothing suggests that John the Apostle had any priestly connection. Even more important is the remarkable and fascinating omission. Philip is one of the apostles, but Polycritus does not identify his John as one of the 12 or as an apostle, even though it would have fortified his position if he had been able to claim John the Apostle as one of his sources. Instead, the Ephesian John is a witness and a teacher and a disciple reclining in the bosom of Jesus, but not the son of Zebedee. A little later in time comes the church father Irenaeus, who lived in France but had his origin in Asia. And he's often referred to as the church father who clearly identified John the Apostle as the author of the 4th Gospel. Now, to be sure, Irenaeus does state that John wrote the Gospel and that he did it in Ephesus. But which John? Richard Bockham's analysis of all the relevant information shows that the many references to John in Irenaeus are surprisingly ambiguous and inconclusive. Richard Bauckham then concludes, this gives the Asian tradition that the beloved disciple who wrote the 4th Gospel was John the Elder a right to be taken very seriously. But wait, isn't it the Apostle John who appears in the Gospel of John as the beloved disciple? Isn't he the one who reclined at the breast of Jesus during the Last Supper? Since only the 12 were with Jesus at the Last Supper, how could this John be anyone else? Wasn't it John who stood at the cross with Mary, the mother of Jesus, and took her into his home at the word of Jesus? And wasn't it John appearing together with Peter in the last chapter of this Gospel, of whom Jesus said, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" Well, look for yourself. Of whom are these things said in the Gospel of John? I found it a fascinating study because none of it was quite as I remembered it. Where is John in the Gospel of John? We now turn to the internal evidence. Remarkably, his name does not appear. Neither do the sons of Zebedee, with one exception. This single reference to the sons of Zebedee in the entire Gospel is in John 21 verse 2. This verse includes a list of 7, no doubt the number is significant, who went fishing. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples. Obviously, one of these 7 also is the disciple whom Jesus loved. John 21, verse 20 through 24 is conclusive evidence that this beloved disciple is the author of the 4th Gospel. When we look at the text here, we see that the disciple whom Jesus loved is the one who had leaned back against him during the supper, and he is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things, that is, the Gospel of John. These verses also suggest that the first readers of this Gospel knew who this was. He was one of them. This Gospel is not anonymous. But which one of the 7 is the beloved disciple? Since he identifies himself elsewhere as disciple, it seems likely that he is one of the 2 anonymous disciples in the list, not one of the sons of Zebedee. The author does make a few appearances early in the book. It is sometimes thought that the nameless disciple in John 1 verse 35 and following is the author. If not, he first becomes visible in John 13 verse 23 during the Last Supper, where he is reclining at the breast of Jesus. Is it conceivable that a disciple, not one of the 12, would be present at the Last Supper? Yes, it is, especially if this person would be the owner of the house where Jesus celebrated, or his son. After all, the other Gospels only state that Jesus came with the 12, not that there were only the 12 with him at the table. In John 18, verse 15 and 16, there is another disciple who is known to the high priest, who's together with Peter, and enables Peter to enter the house of the high priest, where Peter then betrays Jesus. It is likely that it is again the beloved disciple. But would John, the son of Zebedee, have such a relationship in Jerusalem, or any of the other 12? Next, we find the disciple whom Jesus loved at the cross in John 19, verse 26 and 27. It is at the word of Jesus that from that hour the disciple took her, that is Mary, to his own home. It is unlikely that John, the son of Zebedee, or his family would have owned a home in Jerusalem. The family business was located at the Sea of Galilee. The beloved disciple, however, appears to have been a resident in Jerusalem. This would explain a noticeable characteristic of his gospel. So much of it takes place in or near Jerusalem, not in Galilee or elsewhere. A few verses later, Jesus is pierced by the spear of a Roman soldier, which leads to a flow of blood and water. We read, "He who saw it has borne witness, his testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, that you also may believe." Now, clearly this is the author again. But who of the disciples was present at the cross? None are named, not in the other Gospels either, except for some of the women, and the disciple whom Jesus loved, and who took Mary into his home. After the resurrection, in John chapter 20, we find the disciple whom Jesus loved at the empty grave together with Peter. Now, all of this eminently qualifies the author to be a witness, and therefore a gospel writer, but it does not reveal him to be John, the son of Zebedee. None of it comes close to proving that this is John the Apostle. On the contrary, the evidence points away from him. Somehow, unwittingly, I ascribed all of the above to the Apostle John, but he is never mentioned in these references. Bockham has a point. It is worth repeating his conclusion. This gives the Asian tradition that the beloved disciple who wrote the fourth Gospel was John the Elder a right to be taken very seriously. Quite apart from this question of authorship, I see a far more valuable takeaway from this exercise. It leaves me wondering, and I'll finish with this question, what is it like to be a disciple whom Jesus loves?
The show will be starting in just a few moments. Thank you for your patience. The show will be starting in just a few moments.